Good afternoon, everybody. How nice to see such a packed room. My name's Ruth Pitt. I'm a media consultant, and I'm here for the next hour and a quarter to talk to probably two of the finest drama and factual editors in the business. So an awful lot to learn in the next 75 minutes. Do remember that this is your session. Any questions you want to ask, I'll try to remember to stop every now and then to see if you want to ask questions before we move on to the next stage. So wave your hand madly and we'll get a microphone to you. So let me introduce our two guests. Pia Di Ciaula, Italian-Canadian editor now living in London. You started out as a stills photographer, but really talk about a meteoric rise, and you're now editing The Crown and A Very English Scandal, and we're going to see some clips from your work during the next few minutes. Rick Barker, a factual editor with a fantastic range from Panorama, Who Do You Think You Are, Long Lost Family, and most recently Patrick Keelty, my dad, The Peace Deal and Me. So they've got an awful lot to tell us, and I want to crack straight on. So Pia, let me begin with you. You did start in the world of stills photography. So what was was that in Canada?
Yes, Toronto. I wanted to be a fashion photographer because I loved images and compositions and cameras. So I went to film school, and during the first year I had to study motion pictures and still photography, and by the end of first year we had to major in one or the other. And I just fell into filmmaking and then again fell into editing.
And so what was your first job in the moving picture world?
It ended up being, because I love cameras, it was a clapper-loader position on a movie of the week. And I went to meet the DOP, Mark Irwin, who shot a lot of David Cronenberg's films. And he asked me if I knew the ARRI, and I didn't even know what it looked like, but I said yes. And I got the job. And then as soon as the interview ended, I called Panavision, and I said, do you have an ARRI? I have to learn it. I got this job. And they said, well, you're in luck because we have Mark Irwin's camera and you can come and load it and learn it. So that's what I did.
Right. So how did you end up then in the edit room?
So then I followed that film into the editing room. And then luckily that company was commissioned by Disney to make a TV series. And so I started out in sound effects editing, then the following season in dialogue assisting, and then the third season in picture assisting.
And what about television versus film? Because, you know, we're getting some of the world's biggest actors starring in TV dramas now. There isn't the division, I guess, from an editor's point of view between working on film and working on television, or is it very different?
Well, the television I've done recently, there is no division because on The Crown, Stephen Daldry and I treat every episode like a feature film. But prior to that, there was a big division. I moved here so that I could edit independent films with, I think, the best actors and directors in the world. I mean, the actors, they don't have to be as gorgeous or as talented as Hugh Grant, although I could edit him forever. But I find
we could watch him forever.
Oh, yeah. But I find that the actors here are theater trained. They have a great command of the English language and of Shakespeare and drama. And so they translate well into film.
So it's good to know that any aspiring editors here, they're in the right place.
You're in the right place.
OK, I'm going to gallop on to Rick. Your experience is in a very different world, factually based. What was your early story? How did you set out?
Well, so I've always been interested in films since I was a child, actually. I was making films when I was a teenager and been given time off from my A-levels to make films, which was great. And I actually studied film studies at university.
And then that help studying, you know, with an ambition to end up as an editor?
At that point, my ambition was to be a filmmaker rather than an editor. You know, I just wanted to work in the business. And then after that, there was a local TV station. I applied for a job there and got it. Started working pretty much as an editor there straight away, and moved to got fired from there. It got shut down. We all got fired.
And then lost your job.
Yeah, absolutely. Fired. Well, you know, I think you know, being fired in this business is part and parcel of you know the dangers, the occupational hazards. But and then moved to London and worked at a company called The Lab, which was sort of set up actually very much for people like you guys, sort of students and postgrads, to work in production television. So I was lucky enough to direct a few things there, but again, sort of found my way to the edit suite. And after a year or so there, decided to go freelance. And basically got a couple of good gigs early on, which really helped.
You make it sound very easy. I'm sure it wasn't as easy as it sounds.
Well, I think I was probably quite lucky at many junctures. But
you regard yourself as, to some extent, self-taught, even though you did film studies at college.
Absolutely. I mean, the film studies we did at college was very much a sort of academic approach to films. 3 years of watching great movies. Not particularly sort of practical in any way whatsoever. But it was really being able to get into an edit suite and sort of try and work with other young directors and other editors, and you sort of start to sort of piece together a way that you cut things. And you know, I think I have been editing my whole kind of career on digital equipment as well. So you know, Control Z or Apple Z is a great learning tool in many ways. You can always undo what you've done and go back and have another.
But keeping pace with the technology presumably is a challenging part of the job every day for both of you.
Well, Pia?
Well, I started in film, cutting 16mm film on the Moviola, which was very physical, therapeutic, and so much fun. So then I went through all the creations, and some of them were horrible and clunky. I did one system where it was on Super VHS, and so every time you made an edit, you had to go down one generation. So after 8 versions of the show, you couldn't even see people's faces, the detail, because the quality was really bad.
Seems incredible, doesn't it? Looking back, yes.
Yeah, it was interesting to go through all of them. And then when Lightworks was invented, we were thrilled because it was created by film editors, and it had a shuttle and everything. But they didn't keep up with the technology and the software, so I switched to Avid, and I've been on it for 20 years now. And
how about you, Rick?
Well, I mean, I have also worked on VHS machines. I've done a tiny bit on a Moviola, but not really in anger. But yeah, I mean, most of my experience was cutting on Avid. Right. So I kind of learned. I was an assistant for a little while, and I learned the basics of Avid there. And then yes, I mean, pretty much every job I do now is on Avid. Although Premiere and various other things, DaVinci now, seem to be quite common too.
OK, well, we've heard the basics. Let's start looking at the fantastic material. You've just got such a treat ahead. The first clip, Pia, a very English scandal. If we could play that, and then we can have a conversation about it.
Of course, the real question is where to dispose of the body. In New York, they drop corpses in the river. I've read that you can seal a body in concrete at the base of a motorway. Tin mines. That's the solution. David, ready for you now. Pedro Baselli, David Holmes. David's in finance. He was deputy treasurer of the party. He got us those carpets for Liberal headquarters, half price.
Magic Carpet Company, that's me.
We were at Oxford, and we holiday together.
We've had some bloody times, him and me. That beach in Greece.
That waiter.
Anyway, you two must have business. I'll leave you alone.
No. Same business. Come in, lock the door. So I was saying, Norman Scott. Tin mines. Hundreds of abandoned tin mines all over Cornwall.
Brilliant. You drop the body down there, he'll never be found.
Take him to the pub, get him drunk, shove him in a car, drive him out to Bodmin Moor, kill him.
That's my constituency.
Kill him how?
Oh, come on, it's quite easy to break someone's neck. Come here, Pedro. Elbow there, jerk up.
Well, he might wriggle out of it. Now, men like him tend to be wrigglers.
Well, then you'll just have to shoot him, David. Can you get a gun?
I can do whatever you want, Jeremy.
You can do whatever I want, Jeremy. I'll shoot the bugger stone dead.
They didn't show the credit.
Oh, the credit. We must have cut out before the end of the credit. So just tell us a little bit about that. First of all, were you surprised by the incredible success of that series? Because it really did punch through, didn't it?
Well, I was personally a little worried that with the Me Too movement, people might not appreciate what they went through. But I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that people, resonated and appreciated everything.
So what were you trying to do with that clip? There's a lot of pace in there. It moved very quickly.
Yeah, actually, one of the execs asked me to trim it, and I tried trimming it, but it didn't work. The thing about comedy is you have to like show or hear the dialogue, but you also have to have the pauses in between for people to allow people to have it resonate. So his footsteps going up the stairs in between the sentences are like punctuations, and they set up his next line. So you do have to have the pauses. There's a misconception that comedy has to be cut quickly, but actually you have to allow people to let it sink in.
Mm. And you had quite a lot of input into that scene. What role does the editor play in sort of suggesting, what could be done, what pickups could be done, and how, what was your input in terms of any involvement in the shoot itself?
Well, in this clip, in the other clips, I suggested pickup shots. In this clip, I had put the opening credits, just one opening credit, because it was such a 60s and 70s period that I was able to inject a lot of those techniques and add a lot of style to it. So the captions that I used in the show are huge and translucent. Yeah. And so I had them animated and did all that. So I brought that to the show. And
so that's a very creative part of the whole process.
Yes, definitely. They weren't added after. It was integral to the show. Along with, the credits and editing music. An editor these days has to edit music, temp music, to allow the execs and producers to see how it would feel. And so I end up doing that for months, trying different composers' soundtracks. Sometimes I have up to 4 layers of music because I'm trying to get what I hear in my head down so that people understand, whether it's a rhythm track or whether it's one instrument that's laid on top. So I do a lot of intricate sound work.
And when you've got a really big star like Hugh Grant, who is quite magnetic on the screen, how do you sort of cope with that? Because it must be very easy to kind of spend all your time sort of focusing on him in a way.
Well, he's the lead, so I did end up watching him a lot. But it's a bigger responsibility because Hugh came to the cutting room a few times, and it had to be the best that I could make it. And he would come in and he would ask about a certain performance, and then we'd look at the other takes, and then he'd say, "Oh yeah, you chose the right one." And it was gratifying to know that he's a filmmaker, he's not just an actor. He also looked at someone else's performance and asked to look at the takes. And he asked me to switch one take, and it changed the whole scene. And it was a scene I was struggling with, and he was able to resolve that.
So that's real added value when you can work with an actor who has that sort of input.
Definitely, but I have to give credit to Stephen Frears as well. He's very collaborative and very open. So Hugh Grant came in several times. Ben Whishaw came in a few times, and he was so lovely. He just watched it and giggled through the whole thing. He was so amazed.
Great. And the music, again, you mentioned the music. Yeah. It's a period piece. Were you choosing a lot of the period music?
Yes, I was, although the producers did, the lovely producer, Dan Winch, they had purchased a few tracks ahead of time, and Russell T. Davis wrote the script. So he had 2 tracks in the script. Delilah by Tom Jones, when the Dolly Bird fight breaks out. And he had Tie a Yellow Ribbon by Tony Orlando. But the other tracks, for me, weren't rock and roll enough. So for Norman's photo shoot, I chose Friday on My Mind, because it was more, he was going through a period of drugs and alcohol and parties, so I thought that music suited it better. And although it was more expensive, they agreed that it was integral to the scene, so they purchased it.
Right. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions they want to ask on that particular? We can always come back to it. Yeah, you want to ask a... Okay, well, if you could just pass the microphone along, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
What advice could you offer regarding finding entry-level placements and jobs in post-production?
Oh, right, okay.
Well, you could go to a facility. I cut the crown at Molinaire, and they had a lot of runners. And every season on the crown, they would hire a runner who could switch over to being a trainee. And the training that we gave those assistants and the trainees was second to none, because they were working with 6 or 7 editors, and they were able to see different styles and different ways of dealing with material and rushes, and also collaborate with the other assistants. And most of them are now first assistants or second assistants, so they've moved on and they're working.
So you've got to be prepared to go in at
I think
very
so.
entry level and take your time. Would you agree with that, Rick?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, likewise, I work in facilities where you have a lot of runners, and I think hopefully a lot of good editors will always invite the runners in to sort of, you know, if they want to take some time and sit in the edit, if they're allowed, just for half an hour or an hour or so, just to see what's going on. I think that can be crucial. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the way these days. You have to work your way up.
And do you think probably also to show an informed interest in what you're watching and what you're looking at, be actually interested in, you know, commenting on other shows and things?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not much of a spectator sport, editing, is it, really? But I think, yeah, I mean, I think from an editor's point of view, I always love it. If someone comes in and is interested in what I'm doing and has good questions to ask, I will always happily spend time answering them and talking to them about stuff. Absolutely.
And can I just add that it's really good to learn all the technology, because the assistant I have now was from a facility, so she knew all the technology. She just needed to step up to being a freelance assistant. So I gave her the opportunity, knowing that she knew the Avid inside out, she knew how to run things. And so now she's, you know, progressing and editing shorts and...
So being well prepared is really key.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Very, very interesting.
I think the other thing is there is a sort of shortage of editors at the moment. So I think that's sort of, I think it would now would be a good time.
You may be pushing it an open door.
Yeah, to kind of get your hands on
and
get involved.
Okay, well, Rick, I want to show the first of your 3 clips now, which is Long Lost Family, I think, from this year. It's
actually from a few years ago.
Oh, is it? Oh, right, okay. I thought it was a more recent one. This is... we've got a couple of health warnings in these clips, and this is one of them, simply because I think you just need to get your tissues out because it's quite emotional. So we'll watch it and then we'll have a chat about it. Thank you.
Louise has travelled down from Bradford to London to meet Stéphane as he arrives off the train from France.
How I feel? Excited? Happy? Scared? The fear is that since 28 years I was a father, but only on the paper. I'm in the reality. Finally, I'm here. The dreams come true.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you for this day. You have been so courageous.
Are you sure you want to do this?
I'm here.
Oh, dear. feel like I'm dreaming.
You are not. You are not. You are not. I'm here.
Thank you. I think I just want to know why you didn't look for me.
Because it was too... last time that when I've heard that your mother was pregnant, I've asked her to not to keep you. I think guilty and shame was too heavy for me to go ahead to find you.
I don't hate you.
Yeah, I know that. When I have read your letter, it was so full of love.
My mum's always been honest. She's brought me up to just realise that you were just too young. And she did tell me that you wanted a termination, I know that.
You know that, and you can, and you want to meet me. I'm very lucky.
It's okay. It's all right.
So, I mean, it kind of watches like a drama in a way.
Well, that's, I think, very kind of you to say, because that's sort of a lot of what the director was aiming for when she shot it, Kate Schofield. And in fact, with the whole series of Long Lost Family, although it's a sort of a format and part of a sort of formatted piece of television, there's a sort of great pride taken in how it's shot and also how it's cut, and to sort of...
So tell us a bit about the format, because you have to conform to certain principles when you're editing, but at the same time, it's intensely about good storytelling, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in the case of Long Lost Family, it's a format that... I won't explain it, but it's a format whereby the story is broken down into several sections.
I suspect quite a lot of people... Are a lot of you familiar with the programme? Yeah, nodding of heads going on, yes.
Yes, and this is the climax of it. She's meeting her father for the first time, the father she's heard a lot about, and whose mother and who her mother had told her that he wanted an abortion when she fell pregnant, and very much the sort of the build-up of the way the story is structured is with a little sort of mini documentary, what we call a backstory at the beginning. Then there's a sequence where we go and do a sort of a search sequence for the person who we're looking for, the lost family member. Then there is an interview with them when they're found, inevitably. And then there's a moment where we go back and tell the person who's looking, hey, we found your mum, your daughter, your child, whatever. And that is then followed with the reunion, which that's the sort of latter half of. And the reunion is always obviously the climax of the story. And so, as I say, it's very much shot with a sort of, I think, a drama head-on, in terms of you're given a lot of camera angles. A lot of the time it's shot with some handheld camera, some on sticks, and the locations are very carefully chosen. So this is St Pancras, King's Cross, and for me it provided a brilliant backdrop. It's a sort of classic film motif, waiting for someone to get off a train, and and having Louise there, just so nervous and so natural in front of the cameras, not really aware the cameras were there, made it sort of a very powerful and quite easy scene. Well, not easy.
It's also
scene,
the way you choose to cut away. So there's quite a lot of her just watching while you're hearing him, which builds the tension even further.
Absolutely, and also using shots where so a lot of it's shot on a long lens, so the camera's quite far away, deliberately, so that A, it's not intrusive in her face, and B, also it gives a rather nice sort of short depth of field of the focus. So she's in focus and everything else around her is out of focus. And I really liked the people cutting the frame in the foreground, and also people milling around in the background, all the while keeping a tight focus on her, so that somehow you're just in her head a little bit more. You get a sort of an idea of her isolation in that moment.
And parts of it are shot. Is the reunion always shot with two cameras?
So yes, and then so the scene is obviously two parts. The build-up, of which that's only the sort of second half of the build-up, if you see what I mean. And then there's the conversation they go on to have, which is, again, it's filmed in a sort of set-up location near King's Cross, this one, and they used 2 cameras, again quite a distance away from Louise and Stefan, to try and not be as unobtrusive as possible. The sort of editing with the 2 cameras is quite interesting. With these scenes, it's almost entirely necessary. To try and do it with 1 camera would be almost impossible. You'd be too close to them. So we always use 2. And it's little things like including the waiter bringing the glass of water or wine or whatever it was for them. The idea is to sort of set up a real meeting so that hopefully you as the audience don't feel like you're seeing something that's being presented to you. Hopefully it feels like it's unfolding naturally in front of you. And what's great and what's lovely about doing Long Lost Family is that, a lot of these really emotional meetings that people have mean so much to them that actually the camera, and also the skill of the camera teams and directors, the sort of the artifice of it almost disappears. You're working with actors who aren't in any way acting. They are being entirely natural and being entirely themselves.
And just quickly before we move on, because it's formatted, are you nevertheless, ploughing through great swathes of material, or are you dealing with relatively small amounts of material in each given scene?
No, I mean, there's still quite a lot of material. I mean, I think the final cut of that conversation would be 3 minutes, probably 3.5 minutes in itself. And that conversation probably, I mean, it was a few years ago, but it would probably be in about an hour. Of sort of toing and froing with various emotional ups and downs.
So the editing is very much at the heart of the process.
Editing is very much at the heart of it, cutting to the chase with the story.
Okay, any questions before we move on that one? Okay, yes, please, thank you.
Hi there. I'm just interested in the relationship that you editors have with producers, and sort of when you're piecing footage together, how it works, and especially if, say, you disagree with the vision a producer has, and just how that dynamic works between you.
Very interesting question. Pia, do you want to start just quickly?
That is a very interesting question. I feel that the editing department belongs to the director because we are trying to express his or her vision. So directors are kind of possessive of the editing. They sometimes allow producers to watch assemblies, but they don't want any comments. They don't want to be biased by early comments. They need to be free and shoot and explore and experiment.
And sort of give their gift, and then it can be
And then they invite conversation. I've worked with some directors who won't allow anyone to see anything until they have a contracted 6-week director's cut. But I find that now people are more open and collaborative, so they will show cuts, but they don't want feedback.
And what would you say, Rick? Because, of course, in Factual, the producer and the director are often the same person.
Yes, I mean, in Factual, we don't have quite the same sort of relationship with the producer and director. I mean, I would say, for me, I think it's very important that actually the edit suite is the editors, in a sense. We don't have that sort of layering that you guys have in drama of quite so many layers, maybe.
So do you tend to have a lot of head-to-heads with directors?
I mean, I almost went through a stage of talking to the directors, asking them which shot they had found hardest to get, and then deliberately not putting it in order to sort of say, this needs to be what is best for the film. This can't be, about the fact that you climbed a mountain to get this shot, or this, that, or the other. And then you put it in later on, and they feel very good about it, and you feel good about it, and everything's great. But from my point of view, certainly editing and Factual, you're there to bring a fresh pair of eyes onto something, and it's unscripted. I mean, it's unlike, I think, obviously your drama, because it's unscripted. You're dealing with rushes that are sort of totally fresh and totally new. It's your job to kind of try and find a story within them.
So in a way, you both, in different ways, have quite a lot of power in the work you do. Before we move on, I just wanted to ask you about the whole kind of gender issue in editing, particularly, because it is still perceived to be, and in fact, in the craft areas of the industry altogether, you know, sound recorders, camera operators, it does feel very male-dominated still. Pia, what's your experience? And then, Rick, I'd like to hear what you think about that.
Well, when I started as a clapper loader, it was very sexist. And when I expressed to the DOP that, not Mark Irwin, I had done a previous, I was chasing raccoons for a documentary at night. And that DOP said, oh yes, editing, the women belong in the offices, wow. Meaning the editing room. And I was so insulted. But I find that both genders bring a sensibility. So you have to be sensitive to the material, and anyone can edit if they're passionate enough. On The Crown, we had a lot of female editors, and it's a fantastic job. I can't rave about it enough. Every day feels like Christmas. You're getting material from different locations, different actors, different emotions. So you kind of escape through the material.
So clearly there are growing opportunities for women to engage in this fantastic career. Rick, what about you? Do you feel things are changing?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm obviously a man and an editor, but I do think I work a lot with female editors. Almost all the directors and producers I work with, not all of them, but a large, way over half are women. Most of the exec producers, commissioning editors, and so on and so forth, they seem to be, maybe it's because of the shows I work on, I don't know, but there are a lot of women that I work with. And yeah, I mean, I think like Pia says, it's not something that should be defined in any way by gender, just by a desire to tell good stories well.
So most certainly it's a very promising career for both genders.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And can I add, I just finished editing a film called Hope Gap, and the DOP was female, the boom operator was female, the gaffer was female, award-winning female. I mean, don't let gender hold you back. Just be passionate, determined, work very hard. I think that's the key.
Okay, thank you. Pia, I want to move on now to your second clip, which is The Crown. Again, a sort of massive juggernaut, a great UK export, writer Peter Morgan. Can we have a look at that, please, and then we'll chat about it.
I've made the decision to take Charles out of Gordonston and bring him home.
Oh, decide what you like. He's staying there.
Dickie's just reported his unhappiness to me.
Dickie's a meddling, interfering fool who knows nothing.
Well, he knows an unhappy child when he sees one. And by all accounts, Charles is wretched. He's tormented from the moment that he wakes up to the moment that he goes to sleep. Do you know what he calls the place? Hell on earth. Colditz with kilts.
I don't want to debate this.
Well, you have to. And not just because he's your son, but because he's the future king. Bullied children are scarred for life. And scarred children make destroyed adults.
You and I had an agreement. A deal that ensured there would be some level of equality between us in the marriage. It's my decision Charles go to Gordonston. Not now.
And that would be fine for all our other children. But Charles is the future of the crown. And in the name of the crown, and as his mother, I have decided to take him out of Gordonston and bring him home to Eton, to Windsor, where he belongs.
You can't always fall back on the crown.
Oh, yes, I can. And I will.
Then you would do well to remember the promises you made to me, and the consequence breaking those might have on the crown. Charles's education is my responsibility. Yours is to honor your word and keep your husband.
The juxtaposition between the two shots looking out of the window is incredibly powerful. What was your input into that? Because there were a lot of your own ideas in that sequence.
Well, well, first of all, the shot of Philip was a pickup that I kind of requested because he's so horrible and he's such a bully in the argument with the Queen that we needed a little bit of remorse. So we shot that pickup, and then
he was human.
Pardon?
To show he was human.
Because he was doing it from a decent place, because Gordonston helped him so much, not understanding that they were two different types of boys and that Charles did not belong there. So I restructured it and brought up Charles looking at the trophy cabinet at the photo of young Philip when he was there with a big medal. And so it shows the juxtaposition shows Philip connecting with both boys, as himself as a young boy and as his son, as well.
And there was also that very powerful shot of the powerful Queen looking very powerless in a very large room.
Absolutely. Showing the extreme wide shot in the middle of the scene kind of accentuates their disconnection and the distance between the couple. And then by using it at the end, we see her alone, and she's rich, powerful, but she can't help her own son, so she's dwarfed by the size of the room and her status.
And did this juggernaut take over your life when you were cutting it?
They always do. I mean, I'm very passionate, so I worked very hard and long hours. And also because I was working with Stephen Daldry, he shoots a lot of material. And he expects or asks me to send him assemblies at the end of every day. So I would get somewhere between 2.5 to 6 hours of material. And I had to send them to him at the end of the day. And they couldn't be assemblies. They had to be tight. They had to have soundtrack. If I wanted temp music, it had to be present. He doesn't like looking at green screens, so we had to composite. My assistant had to composite all those shots so that it looked like a finessed show, even though it was a first assembly.
So a lot of work on your
part. A lot of pressure, but it was really collaborative, and he's wonderful to work with, so I loved it.
Any questions before we move on to the next one? Yes, right at the back here, if you can dash up. Speedy microphones.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you find it exhausting, this whole editing process, from time to time?
Do you lose sleep?
I lose sleep sometimes, but it's a big adrenaline rush. I mean, you're creating, and every day is different, like I said, so sometimes it's challenging if you're trying to achieve something and you might not have the right shot, or if a performance isn't up to scratch and you have to kind of create something or squeeze every bit of drama or emotion out of a certain actor. But I wouldn't, it's not exhausting in a negative way. It's very stimulating.
It's a highly creative process, isn't it? So that in itself, I guess, is quite exhausting at times.
Yes, I think it can be fairly intense, I think it would be fair to say. And, you know, and certainly the sort of current affairs stuff that I've done is you know, you find yourself in the suite having discussions at very late hours of the night on occasion about how a scene is working, or whether or not a producer or a journalist can write a very long piece of explanatory journalism over your beautifully crafted sequence or not.
Well, I'm sure you had lots of battles like that in the clip we're going to show now. Any other questions? Oh, yes, there's a question there and a question there. We'll just take a couple of quick questions before we move on. Thank you.
Hi. When do you determine like when to put in the music? 'Cause obviously like the music is like a big aspect of that end scene as well. So when do you know even when to just like bring it in really quietly so that it, you know, will get louder at the end? What's the point?
It'd be interesting to talk about that when we look at Tyrannosaur, actually.
Yes, but it's similar kind of parallels there. I like to use music effectively, and I don't want to manipulate the audience in any way. I mean, some people might have had violins throughout that whole argument, but it's just a subtle, it's almost like a punctuation and just a transition into the next scene. And it's almost like a release, because Philip is leaving the room and the Queen is isolated, so it was a gentle way to bring it in, and also to tie in Philip with young Charles.
Great. So, and Ricky, you introducing music early in the process of editing, or is it something that you get the scene right and then you bring the music in?
Well, from a personal point of view, I like to get it in quite early, at least a sort of temp track, something that will work.
And you can use it to manipulate a scene as well.
Well, that Long Lost Family scene has got sort of, got the strings over it, as you say.
No, I didn't mean
No. But yeah, I mean, it is. I think, for me, the joy of editing is kind of is getting to that point whereby you're feeling the emotion of the scene.
Okay, we'll hold that thought for a moment. And there was one other question here, and then we'll look at the next clip.
Hello, I'm Edward. Nice to meet you. Hi. It's an advice. I mean, for me, a good editor is that person who succeeds to create feelings and emotions. A storytelling, it's easy, everybody could do a story. But the great editor for me is that one who touches your soul. An advice for the young editors how to train themselves to create emotions through the cuts. Oh. Because I provided the puzzle, like filming, editing, but how long will take the cut? What reaction you'll use? How you'll decompose the beauty? Okay, and you understand what I'm telling you? Mm-hmm. How you can train yourself to succeid to create emotions.
Is the answer to that actually within yourself, I guess, as a human being?
It's just yourself.
Yeah, it's, everyone has an innate rhythm. And it's also your gut instincts, like what affects you. If you stay on a shot a bit longer, like I did play on the Queen a little longer because she was the one being bullied, and we want to empathize with her because she's trying to help her son. So if you stay on a person a bit longer, if you, I find sometimes you don't want to see them cry, because for me, seeing somebody struggling to withhold that emotion affects me more. So it's rhythm, it's what close-ups you show, when you show the close-up, it's so many factors.
And being guided by, in a sense, as you say, if it's moved you, that's a good indicator that you should kind of go with it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to gallop on, because actually it's a really good thing to be thinking about when we look at the next clip, which is Patrick Kilty, My Dad, The Peace Process and Me, where you were very much involved in handling, manipulating the situation and the emotion that Patrick Kilty was feeling. Should we look at the clip and then talk a bit about that?
I didn't know as a child that Gaelic football was exclusively played by Catholics. There were two schools in Dundrum. There was the Protestant school and there was the Catholic school. You thought that was normal. Looking back on that now, that is completely abnormal. But we knew nothing different. We weren't a political family, and it was a very, very idyllic childhood.
Yeah, good team. Yeah.
That all changed on the 25th of January, 1988, a week before my 17th birthday, when a car full of paramilitaries pulled up outside my dad's office.
Two hooded men armed with handguns walked into the contractors at about 11:30. They shot Mr. Kilty several times.
I was in school and I was asked to go to the headmaster's office. And they said, your dad's been shot. And I remember saying just immediately, is he dead? And they said, yes.
My dad's office would have been just where the curb was.
Very, very likeable. Chairman of the local Gaelic football club. Would have done anything for you. His two sons had played on the county minor team that won the All-Ireland this year, Patrick and John, and very, very sadly missed.
Everything about it felt you were going through it, but it wasn't real. There's a report about the man who's been killed. They're mentioning my dad's name.
It became clear that the businessman may have been murdered by loyalists
the police have asked anyone with information about Mr. Keelty's murder to contact them.
Nothing prepares you for the numbness that you actually feel when you go through it. There was someone from the village that was involved, someone who knew him and who met him and had decided he was next. I find that strange, even after all this time. My dad wasn't involved in politics, but he was a well-known Catholic and an easy target. And although they never caught all those involved, 3 local loyalists were given life sentences for organising his murder. For years, the killing continued, on both sides. Then in 1998, a decade after my dad died, we were all offered the chance to stop the violence. Every household in Northern Ireland, including mine, was sent a copy of the Good Friday Agreement. It set out a plan to disarm the men of violence, release paramilitary prisoners, and for both sides to share power in government. And then we voted on it.
The people of Northern Ireland have given their overwhelming backing to the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes, 71.12%.
So lots of things going on there, really. But a man who sort of was almost still numb as well. So how did you get the emotion?
Well, so Paddy Keelty, who presented that, was very keen to not make it his personal story, not focus overly on the tragedy of his dad's murder. But Leo, the director, and myself both felt that actually this was the core of the film, it's the core of the point, and it's actually the core of the Good Friday Agreement, you know, to try and deal with the grief that both sides felt. And so we felt we wanted to, at the same time as creating a scene where he talks about his dad's death, about which he has very guarded emotions, try and integrate into it some degree of him battling with his emotions, which was the sort of the 3 jump cuts as he turns and walks towards his dad's house. Yeah, he actually, as the film progressed, became more and more open to talking about things that he had felt, or things that he currently feels, about his dad. So we felt about his dad's death. So we felt that we needed to sort of set this moment up at the beginning of the film. It was almost the pivotal moment. It was the moment where his personal story and the story of the Good Friday Agreement and its possible whatever the word would be, destruction after Brexit, come together. So it was a nice way of tying personal grief into a much larger political story.
And also using archive to underline that emotional feeling, really, because the archive itself is emotional, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, we were lucky enough to have 3 or 4 shots of... Lucky enough. We had 3 or 4 shots of the scene when Paddy's dad was killed from a news report. And so obviously we used those. And I deliberately repeated the sort of pull-out. I kind of wanted to exacerbate the kind of local news quality of it. Dundrum and Northern Ireland is a very small place. You know, when Paddy goes back, he's greeted by everyone, not because he's a celebrity, slightly because he's a celebrity, but also because they happen to know his brother or they happen to know his cousin. So it feels like a very small and familiar place. And that's sort of set up through the film, and that was part of the reason we used the archive the way we did there.
And it also underlines the quite sort of candid camera work that you're sort of just following it. It's not,
yes.
It's not stylized. It's very on the ground.
No, and that whole scene was obviously shot. You know, Leo, the director, had taken Paddy there, I think, possibly to try and prompt him into a sort of much more graphic outburst of emotion. And as Paddy was pretty guarded about it. So actually, those shots of him walking away from camera are slightly cheated. I mean, they were filmed when he was there, but they were merely when he was moving from location A to location B. And
so that takes us into the slightly tricky territory, in a way, of manipulating emotion.
Absolutely.
That's part of what you do, really.
Well, absolutely. You know, and actually in TV, in factual TV, we have long debates about how far one can go, what one can do, how one is able to manipulate the truth. I mean, the reality is everything we do is artifice. You know, we create interviews, we chop up sentences, we make films.
So in a sense, drama is more true than factual. Yeah. It's an interesting thought. Any questions at this stage? Yes, we've got two at the front here. If you'd just like to pass the microphone, we'll start on the front row. I feel I'm almost sitting on the lap of the people on the front row. Right.
Just a quick question. Funnily enough, I myself am currently editing a montage piece for an assignment covering the Brexit fallout coming down in Northern Ireland, and something I've had to do a lot of discussion with, and even being someone growing up in it, being from all of it, it's staying unbiased as an editor, even then with the footage. Was a lot of that fell to you? Was that just your responsibility to make sure that you're, obviously with topics like this and others, it's very sensitive and can have fallout on either side no matter what? So was the responsibility more on yourself, or did you have more directors?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the responsibility was across the film. I think something we all took very seriously. You know, the film explores. It talks to people who are part of the IRA. It talks to people who are part of the unit of loyalist gunmen who killed Paddy's dad. Not actually the people who killed him, but people who were part of the same outfit. So, you know, the whole point was to take an unbiased look, and very much Paddy's view was that this is a human tragedy rather than a sort of, you know, a political film falling down on one side or the other. And the Good Friday Agreement was actually the sort of significant moment, was the peace, if you like, that he wanted to support, that it was his political cause, rather than either republicanism or unionism.
But it's a very difficult thing to do when you have a sort of, you know, vested interest in the topic. Thank you. Do you want to just pass the microphone to... That's it, great. Thank you. Just a quick one.
Hi. So what kind of editing software do you use? Is there like one that is like generally used in the industry, or do you guys use like a variety?
Well, yes. I mean, Avid, I think we were saying, Avid is the one that we, by and large, use, I think, both of us. Yeah. People use Premiere quite a lot now. I don't know what other things...
It's only Avid for me.
It's only Avid for you. It's really only Avid for me, too.
Sounds like Avid gets the vote.
Yeah. They're all pretty good, to be honest, I think. But there we go.
OK, well, we're going to move on to the fifth clip now, which is Tyrannosaur, and it's a bit grisly in places, so brace yourselves for that. Let's just have a quick look, and then we'll talk about it. It's sort of the absence of music, actually, that makes it all the more powerful.
Yeah, I think the absence of everything except Foley when he's walking through the house. And then, you know, the reverb guitar. I mean, Paddy...
Explain Foley a bit for people.
Foley, you know, after you make the film, you go into a studio and you do all the footsteps, all the cups down, because you have to create the whole film or show with only sound effects so that when it gets delivered to another country, they can just slap in their language, and then they've got the whole soundtrack already mixed. So just footsteps and doors, and so I suggested that we shoot the POV when he's in the house of the kitchen, you know, so you just see the camera turning around so that you wonder, it adds tension because you wonder if Eddie's going to come out and attack Peter. And also, Paddy hates establishing shots, but the shot of the house is part of the story. Peter's looking at the house, and I added a little zoom in to make it more ominous, and psychologically it draws us in because we know that Olivia's there and he's going to go confront her.
So it was really just an incredibly intense scene when he actually confronts her.
Yes, it gets worse, and you know my stomach turned because I mean when I was cutting this film I cried every single day. The rushes were so authentic and real, and you just believe everything that they say and everything they've gone through, and I think you know that performance stayed with Olivia for a long time. I mean we were all very collaborative and supported Patty so much because the script was so amazing.
And also a massively critically acclaimed film. It must have been an incredible thing to work with.
It won 40 awards worldwide.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Not bad going.
You know, and it was the lowest I've ever been paid, but that's okay. You know, when you're given a gift like that Patty script and the opportunity to work with such a brilliant guy, such a talented actor, writer, director, you know, I think all of us would have done it for free.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm going to move on without going for questions right now to hold any questions because I want to give plenty of time for our last clip, which is Reinventing the Royals, which was a fantastic short series written and presented by Steve Hewlett, tragically no longer with us, but you worked very closely with Steve, and it raises some fantastically interesting issues about consent and the way you assemble this kind of investigative reporting. So let's have a look at that.
There was a time when the public tug-of-war between palace and press threatened to tear apart the entire institution.
Charles knew virtually nothing about media relations.
They viewed the press as this unmanageable beast, trying to get into every aspect of their lives. They viewed the media as having hounded their mother to death.
Today, the younger generation appears to be riding high, a new monarchy for a new age. But behind the scenes, the royal family's relationship with the media is far from straightforward.
These are the first people I've ever covered, ever, who will not speak to me at all.
They would rather sup with the devil than talk to you.
We want more. They're not prepared to give.
For all of his easygoing facade, Prince William is obviously a very controlling character.
As the Queen gets older, succession beckons and heirs stand in line. So the public interest in the royal family and the institution they represent will intensify. And that means the relationship between the Windsor family and the media, so often strained, really has never been so important. This is the story of a decades-long battle between the First Family and the Fourth Estate, the monarchy and the media. And it's a story defined by what happened in a Paris underpass back in August 1997.
We have a flash here saying that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died in a car crash in Paris. They'd been pursued by paparazzi on motorbikes.
This was such profoundly shocking and shattering news that I confess I had difficulty just telling the newsroom that, no, actually, she's dead.
I'd not been asleep all night. I'd been up all through the night, working. I'd not even thought about Diana dying. I got into the hospital and I saw the coffin and I started to cry, upset, you know, because I realised that it was happening. She was really dead. I had all the cameras around my neck and the people were saying, oh, you're an assassin, you're a killer, you know.
It was obvious to me that this was going to be one of the most serious moments in the history of the modern history of the British press.
Steve Hewlett was and will always be in media history one of the great investigative journalists of all time, really. Yes. What was it like working with him on that?
Well, it was an absolute joy working with him on that. It was a story he really, I think, which was very close to his heart in many ways. He really got his teeth into it. We were sort of cutting it, and he'd be in the back of the edit suite on the phone to the royal press officers, sort of demanding archive from them, and you know, sort of saying, "Well, if you don't give it to me, that is the story." And
so the situation was very live and changing all the time.
It was very live and changing the whole time in the edit. I think Chris Walker and I who was the director, had an idea of roughly how the story was going to play out, and obviously that Diana's death was the sort of possible pivotal moment, but other than that, that was it. And we had a lot of interviews which Steve had done, and we sort of tried to sort of kind of get going with it as quickly as possible.
So you basically had a load of talking heads, a lot of extraordinary archive.
Yes.
You were making a series about the royal family, and the royal family was, in a sense, your source of authenticating what you were saying. So it could hardly have been a more difficult project.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the royal family, I think, well, as the film goes on to explain, had historically been fairly manipulative of the media. I mean, that was the story we were telling, was the story of those manipulations. And yes, it took someone with sort of Steve's brain to really kind of drill down through that and pick out exactly which elements of the story we were going to tell and how best to tell them.
And also raises the importance of fantastic writing in this kind of factual programming.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, again, one of the experiences when you're making a film like that with someone like Steve, I mean, Chris, the director, and I would sit in the edit and we'd kind of get a sequence together and we'd write the sequence together and we'd have a sort of rough cut. And Steve would come in, sometimes with Rachel, and we'd hammer the script over and over again, and we'd kind of be rewritten and re-recorded. We'd drop it back in and see how it worked, and that was the process of working.
So constant adrenaline.
Constant adrenaline. Constant adrenaline. Yeah. But always the feeling, A, that you were doing something that felt important. You were telling a story that felt important. And B, in this case, we were telling a story that hadn't really been told before in the way it had been told. I mean, there was, it had all been in the papers, but at various times, but I don't think anyone had put together two films that actually broke down the royal family's media stories and analysed them and, sourced them and found out, exactly where the leaks were coming from, so to speak.
Yeah.
In the royal family.
Quite a trailblazer.
Slightly anti-crown, possibly.
You've got the two extreme representations of the royal family in one room. OK, we've just got 5 minutes or so left, so some questions. So there's one there and one there. Thank you, if you could, thank you.
Hello. I was curious earlier when you were talking about the POV shot going into the kitchen, and it made me wonder how much contact does the editor have with a scriptwriter, or is it through the rushes that you're actually changing the story? Because I'm sort of being taught that story is changed at 3 stages. You obviously have the script, the director, and the editor, but at the level I'm with, I write, but I don't really speak to an editor. So the higher up you go, I mean, do you have contact with the scriptwriter?
Well, that depends. I'll address the POV question first, because until I get the material, I don't know what it's going to look like. So Patty had shot the front of Peter and the back of Peter, and I felt that a POV could be useful. So I speak with the director on a daily basis during the shoot, so I suggested it. I even went to set because we were very close. We all moved to Leeds for the shoot, and we were living in the same complex, and we had all the meals together. So Patty would come to the cutting room a couple times a day, and it was the first time that I was only 3 or 4 hours behind camera instead of a whole day, because we set it up that we would get rushes twice a day. So everything they had shot in the morning, I could show Patty at dinner time, and we could discuss any pickups. And now, as far as the script is concerned, I get a script before I meet the director, and I read it a couple times, make notes, positive and negatives, and if I'm asked, I give them my notes. And when I went to meet Patty for the very first time, I spent 5 grueling weeks waiting to see if I had gotten the job. It was his first film, so he wanted to meet all the editors available. And then I asked my agent to set up another meeting, because in the first interview, I didn't get a chance to tell him what I thought about the script in detail. So when I went back the second time, I said, I don't think you need these 2 scenes. They had Eddie at work and all that. And he was a little shocked, but then the producer said, oh, that's a brilliant idea, because I understand why. Because we were going off on a tangent, and emotionally, we were with Peter and Olivia instead of Eddie. So those are the contributions you can make at script stage.
So don't write anything off, I think, is the answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. We'll take a question here.
Hi. My question is, how much is the color correction is important, and what kind of tone when you are, like making scenes, and what kind of software you use for color correction?
That's an interesting question, because I've noticed in recent dramas the colour grade is becoming more and more important, it seems to me, and more fantastic. I mean, is that true in factual and
absolutely.
Drama?
We probably spend less time doing it, but it's a really important part of the process. You look at a film that is ungraded, and you look at the various different types of grade can make to that film, some various different types of colouring can make to that film, or make to a scene, and the effect can be quite extraordinary.
Well, and bringing it to drama, in The Crown, for instance, the big pink room with the pink clothes, and you sort of more or less pinking it up, really.
Yeah. Well, what happens, the director of photography shoots the material and then applies a loot to it, which is the overall effect he or she wants. And so we get the rushes, and on the Avid, I sometimes have to even out the grade. So I add contrast or make it lighter, darker, just so that it has an even look. And then in the grade, we address everything.
It's a major area of post-production, yeah. Any other questions? We're literally running out of time now, so I think that might be a perfect time, because sorry, but did you say there's one more?
Yeah.
There's one.
Okay, yes, question here. Very last question then. 1 minute.
Thanks for coming today. When you're obviously as far along with your careers as you are, would you say that you have a particular style that people who are hiring you choose you for, or is it more based on sort of how you work with people?
Well, that's a lovely question to end on, Pia.
I think you can't impose a style on everything you do. Like, A Very English Scandal was very different from The Crown to Tyrannosaur. So what you have to do is watch the material, read the script, really get inside the director's head and how it's shot, and then accentuate or bring the editing to another level, encompassing everything.
So what, in a sense, you bring is your reputation for the way you approach things?
Sensibility to the material, ability to restructure, good taste and instincts that the director connects with.
Okay, thank you. And Rick?
Likewise, I think that's absolutely it. You're almost paid to not have a style to impose on it, if you like, but to understand and adapt to whatever the film really needs. And from my point of view, I think a lot of the time I work with the same directors over and over again, and you sort of develop a relationship together. So that's what most of my work comes from, really. The coattails of directors who are...
Coattails of directors. And a huge amount of commitment, which I think you've shown this afternoon in all your comments, the passion and the commitment that you have for your work and the fantastic results that we've all shared this afternoon as a result. So would you please thank Pia and Rick?